The morning was gray and quiet when Emily Carter arrived at O'Hare Airport. She stood by the large glass windows, watching raindrops slide down the glass like slow-moving tears. It was supposed to be just another business trip, nothing unusual. She had done many before, but this one felt different from the start. Her boss, Daniel Harris, was joining her. He was the company's senior marketing director, smart, respected, and calm under pressure. People admired him, and so did Emily, though she tried never to show it. At 32, Emily had built her career with hard work and quiet determination. She was known for her focus, her calm attitude, and her ability to stay professional in every situation. But beneath her polished smile, she often felt tired of pretending that everything in her life was perfect. Her marriage to Mark had grown distant over the years. They still cared for each other, but the laughter was gone. The small touches, the late-night talks, they had faded into routine. When Daniel greeted her at the gate, she smiled politely. He was dressed neatly in a gray suit, his hair slightly wet from the rain. "Morning, Emily," he said with that gentle voice she had always found steadying. "Ready for Seattle?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with a soft laugh. Their flight was delayed due to bad weather. They found a small cafe near the boarding area and decided to wait it out. The airport was full of restless travelers and the sound of rolling suitcases, but their corner felt strangely calm. They talked about the project they were traveling for, a major deal that could bring big success to their company. But soon, their conversation drifted away from work. Daniel asked about her family, her hobbies, what she liked to do when she wasn't working. Emily hesitated, but then found herself opening up. "I used to paint," she said. "I stopped years ago. Life just got busy." Daniel smiled gently. "You should start again. People forget how to do what makes them happy when life gets serious." His words stayed with her. No one had said something like that to her in a long time. The hours passed quickly. The flight was finally announced, and as they walked to the gate, Emily caught herself noticing small things about him, the calm way he spoke to the airline staff, the faint tiredness in his eyes, the way he smiled when she joked about airport food. She reminded herself that he was her boss, a married man, and this was just a trip. But deep down, something in her had shifted. When they finally boarded, the plane was quiet, the air cool and dim. They sat beside each other, their laptops open at first, but work quickly gave way to soft conversation. Daniel shared stories from his early career mistakes, lessons, funny memories. Emily listened, smiling, feeling the kind of comfort she hadn't felt in years. Halfway through the flight, turbulence shook the plane lightly. Emily tensed, gripping the armrest. Daniel noticed and gave her a reassuring look. "It's all right." "Happens all the time," he said with a calm smile. His voice was steady, confident. For a moment, she felt safe. When the plane finally landed in Seattle, the city was covered in mist and drizzle. Their driver took them to the downtown hotel booked by the company. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Emily's room was next to Daniel's. It felt both convenient and unsettling. After settling in, Daniel called her to remind her about dinner with the local partners. "Nothing too formal," he said. "Just a friendly meal." She changed into a simple dress and met him in the lobby. The restaurant was cozy, with soft lights and the faint sound of jazz. Dinner went smoothly. They talked business at first, then laughed over stories about awkward meetings and terrible coffee during past trips. At one point, when Daniel was describing his first job, Emily noticed how relaxed he seemed, his usual professional tone replaced with something softer, more human. He told her about the long hours, the pressure, and how hard it was to balance everything at home. "Sometimes," he said, "you give so much to work, you forget there's a life outside of it." Emily nodded quietly. She knew exactly what he meant. She had been doing the same for years. After dinner, they walked back to the hotel through the light rain. The streets glowed under the reflections of streetlights, the air cool and clean. They talked about books, music, and dreams they had let go of. It was easy, natural, too natural. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt seen. When they reached the hotel entrance, Daniel turned to her and said, You did great today. I couldn't have handled that client meeting without you." She smiled, brushing back a strand of wet hair. "Thank you, Daniel. That means a lot." There was a pause, brief, but meaningful. The rain fell softly around them, and for that one heartbeat, the world seemed to slow down. Then Daniel nodded and stepped back. "Good night, Emily." "Good night," she replied, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. In her room, Emily changed and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. The sound of rain on the glass filled the silence. She should have been thinking about the next day's meeting, but instead, she kept thinking about the way Daniel had looked at her kind. Steady and somehow lonely. She wasn't sure what it was, but something inside her felt different. Not wrong, not right, just different. She reminded herself that she was married, that he was her boss, and that feelings like these should stay buried. But emotions are stubborn things. They don't listen to reason. As the city fell quiet, Emily realized it wasn't Daniel himself that unsettled hurt was what he represented. He reminded her of something she had lost long ago: connection. The feeling of being understood without explanation. That night, she lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. She told herself it was just a trip, just a professional relationship. But deep down, she knew the truth. This was the beginning of something she couldn't easily forget. The rain outside whispered softly against the glass. And somewhere in the room next door, Daniel was probably lying awake too, thinking about the same unspoken thing neither of them could name. And though nothing had happened, no touch, no confession, no crossed line, something had changed. A door had quietly opened between them, and neither knew how to close it again. The next morning in Seattle began with soft sunlight breaking through the clouds. Emily Carter woke early, her mind still restless from the night before. She told herself to focus on work, to push away the strange warmth she felt whenever she thought about Daniel Harris. He was her boss, a married man, and this was a business trip, nothing more. Yet deep inside, she couldn't stop remembering how kind his eyes had looked in the rain. At breakfast, Daniel joined her in the hotel cafe. He greeted her with his usual calm smile, as if nothing unusual lingered between them. "Big day ahead," he said lightly. She nodded, pretending her heart wasn't racing. They talked about schedules, clients, and presentation points, every word polite, controlled. But every time their eyes met, there was an energy neither could ignore. Their day was long and demanding. The meetings went well, though tiring. Daniel led the discussions with confidence, while Emily supported him flawlessly. They were a perfect professional pair, quick to adapt, always in sync. When one of them paused, the other stepped in smoothly. It felt effortless, almost natural. Even their clients noticed, complimenting their teamwork. "You two make a great team," one of them said. Emily smiled politely, but the words struck deeper than they should have. Later that evening, they returned to the hotel, exhausted but satisfied. The company they'd met with had been impressed, and the project looked promising. Emily planned to spend the evening alone, maybe room service, a quiet meal, some rest. But then the front desk called to inform her that the dinner the clients had planned was canceled due to bad weather. A storm had rolled in over Seattle again, filling the sky with heavy clouds and the sound of steady rain. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Looks like dinner's off," he said. "But we still need to eat. The restaurant downstairs looks good. Join me." She hesitated for a moment, then agreed. After all, it was just dinner. The restaurant was warm and quiet, with soft lighting and the faint sound of rain against the windows. The world outside felt far away. They sat at a corner table, ordered simple meals, and started talking. What began as small talk soon turned personal. Daniel told her about his early career. How he had once worked 16-hour days just to prove himself. He spoke about his wife and kids, but his tone carried a quiet sadness. "Sometimes," he said, "you get so caught up trying to provide that you forget to live." Emily nodded, feeling an ache of recognition. "I know what you mean," she said softly. "I think I've been living on autopilot for years." He looked at her with gentle surprise. You seem like you've got everything together." She smiled faintly. Looks can lie. I'm good at pretending." There was a pause between them, a calm, heavy silence filled with unspoken understanding. The air seemed to thicken with emotion, though neither said a word about what was really happening. Their meals arrived, but they barely noticed the food. They talked about dreams, his wish to travel more, her old love for painting. The conversation felt easy, honest. For once, Emily didn't have to filter her thoughts. She felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. After dinner, Daniel suggested they walk a little before heading up. The rain had softened to a drizzle, the streets shimmering under the streetlights. They walked slowly, side by side, umbrellas in hand. The city was quiet, peaceful, as if holding its breath for them. They spoke softly about how strange it was to feel so close to someone after such a short time. "It's funny," Daniel said. "You spend years around people and never feel anything. Then someone walks in, and suddenly everything feels different." Emily looked down, her chest tightening. "Maybe it's just timing," she said. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe." When they reached the hotel, Daniel pressed the elevator button. As the doors opened, they stepped inside together. The ride was silent except for the soft hum of the elevator. Their reflections in the mirrored wall showed to people who looked calm, but whose hearts were anything but. The elevator stopped on Daniel's floor first. He turned to her. "Good night, Emily," he said softly. There was something in his tone warm, sincere, and filled with things he didn't dare to say. She looked up at him and smiled gently. "Good night, Daniel." He stepped out and the doors closed. The moment the elevator began to move again, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her heart was pounding. Not because of anything that had happened, but because of what almost had. Back in her room, she sat by the window again, watching the rain fall over the city. She knew nothing wrong had happened. There had been no line crossed, no promise broken. But emotionally, something had shifted. She could feel it deep inside, the beginning of something she didn't want to name. Over the next 2 days, they continued their work with perfect professionalism. In meetings, they were calm and efficient. But during short breaks or quiet moments, the tension between them was almost visible. A passing glance, a shared smile, a simple touch when exchanging documents, all small. Harmless things that somehow carried too much meaning. Emily tried to ignore it. She told herself she was imagining it, that it was just a momentary connection between two people who understood each other. But every night, when she returned to her room and replayed their conversations in her mind, she felt the same quiet pull, gentle, persistent, and impossible to ignore. On the final evening before their flight back, Daniel invited her for one last dinner to celebrate finishing the project. "Just a quick meal," he said, smiling. "You earned it." She wanted to refuse, but didn't. Something in his tone made it hard to say no. They met again in the same restaurant. The same warm light, the same soft rain outside. But this time it felt different, heavier, quieter. They didn't talk about work. They didn't talk much at all. It was as if words had become unnecessary. Every look, every pause said enough. When the meal ended, neither moved. Finally, Daniel sighed. "I don't want to make things complicated," he said quietly, "but I think you know what I'm feeling." Emily's throat tightened. "Yes," she whispered, "but we both know we can't." He nodded slowly. "You're right." They walked to the elevators again, the silence between them deeper than words. At his floor, he paused, just like before. But this time, he didn't speak. He simply looked at her long enough for her to understand everything he wasn't saying. Then he gave a small nod and stepped out. When the doors closed, Emily pressed her hand to her chest. Her heart ached not because of something lost, but because of something that could never be. Back in her room, she turned off the lights and lay in the dark listening to the rain. She knew she would never forget this trip. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. It was a connection too deep to name. It's too fragile to survive in the real world. It was the kind of feeling that changes a person quietly, from the inside out. And though the line between them had not been crossed, both knew they had come dangerously close. The final day in Seattle came with soft gray skies and the quiet sound of rain. brushing against the hotel windows. Emily Carter woke up early, feeling a strange heaviness in her chest. Their business trip was almost over. By evening, they would fly back to Chicago, and everything that had happened or almost happened would fade into memory. Yet something deep inside her didn't want to let go just yet. When she met Daniel Harris in the lobby, he smiled in his usual polite way, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Ready for our last round of meetings?" Kay asked. She nodded, matching his calm tone even as her heart fluttered. The day was packed with final presentations and client discussions. They worked flawlessly, their teamwork smooth and natural as always. But beneath the professional rhythm, there was a quiet ache neither of them could ignore. Every time their eyes met across the conference table, it was like an unspoken conversation filled with questions neither dared to ask. By late afternoon, the meetings were done. The clients were pleased. The project had been a success. Their company would be proud. On paper, it was a perfect trip. But for Emily, it felt far from over. There was something unfinished between her and Daniel, something hanging in the air, waiting to be addressed. That evening, the company they'd partnered with hosted a small celebration dinner. The restaurant was elegant, full of laughter and clinking glasses. Emily tried to enjoy it, joining in conversations and smiling when expected, but her mind wasn't really there. Across the table, Daniel looked composed, yet distant. Every so often, she caught him glancing at her, quickly looking away as if afraid of being caught. When the dinner ended, the rest of the group decided to head to another lounge for drinks, but Daniel declined politely. "It's been a long week," he said. Emily followed his lead, also excusing herself. She told herself it was just exhaustion, but she knew better. Outside, the city was quiet under a soft drizzle. The hotel was only a few blocks away, and Daniel offered to walk her back. She hesitated for a moment before agreeing. The streets shimmered under streetlights, and the air smelled of wet pavement. Neither of them spoke at first. The sound of their footsteps filled the silence. Finally, Daniel broke the quiet. "You ever feel like life moves too fast for your heart to catch up?" he asked, his voice low. Emily looked at him. "All the time." He smiled faintly. "I keep wondering when I stopped feeling excited about things. Work, home. It's like I'm just moving through it all." She understood too well. "I used to think I was just tired. But now I think it's more than that. It's like something's missing." They stopped at a corner, waiting for the light to change. The glow from the street lamp cast a soft light on his face. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, everything they had been holding back seemed to rise to the surface. "Emily," said quietly, "I don't want to say something I'll regret, but I can't pretend this connection doesn't exist." Her heart pounded. She didn't look away. "I feel it too," she admitted softly, "but we both know what it means." Daniel nodded slowly. "We can't cross that line. I respect you too much for that." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. She wanted to cry not because of sadness, but because of how rare it was to find someone who understood her without judgment or expectation. They kept walking. The rain grew heavier, and Daniel held his umbrella over both of them. It was a small gesture, but it felt intimate, almost protective. They walked close enough that their shoulders brushed now and then. Neither moved away. When they reached the hotel, they paused at the entrance. The lobby lights glowed warmly behind the glass doors. Emily looked at him, unsure of what to say. The goodbye felt heavier than it should have. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being kind. For listening." He smiled gently. "You deserve that, Emily. You deserve to be heard." There was a long pause. The rain was falling harder now, creating a curtain of sound around them. For a moment, they stood under the awning, both soaked at the edges, neither wanting to leave. Daniel took a small step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "If things were different," Emily's eyes softened. "But they're not," she said, finishing his thought. He nodded, the pain clear in his expression. "You're right." They looked at each other, two people standing on opposite sides of the same feeling, bound by reality, but tempted by emotion. There was no kiss, no promise, no touch. Just silence, thick and full of what they couldn't say. Finally, Daniel took a slow breath. "Good night, Emily." She smiled faintly. "Good night, Daniel." He turned and walked toward the elevators, his footsteps fading away. She stood there for a long time, watching until he disappeared from sight. Then she turned and walked back to her room, her heart heavy yet strangely peaceful. Inside her room, she sat by the window again, the rain tapping softly against the glass. The city below was quiet, lights blurring through the mist. She thought about everything that had happened during the trip, the laughter, the long talks, the moments that felt too close. She thought about the line they hadn't crossed, and how that line was the only thing holding them together in the right way. She realized then that sometimes love isn't about being together. Sometimes it's about recognizing a connection and letting it stay unspoken, because it's the only way to protect it. Daniel had given her that kind of respect, the kind that didn't take, didn't push, didn't ruin. Lying in bed, she closed her eyes and let the memory of the walk replay in her mind, the sound of the rain, the warmth of his voice, the way he looked at her when he said goodbye. It wasn't a story of betrayal or broken promises. It was a story of restraint, of two hearts that found comfort in each other, but knew where the truth had to stay. When the morning came, she packed her things and met Daniel in the lobby. He looked composed as always, but his smile carried a quiet sadness. On the flight back to Chicago, they sat beside each other, polite but distant. They spoke about work, upcoming plans, and schedules. Nothing personal, nothing real. Yet beneath every word was the weight of everything they had shared. When the plane landed, Daniel thanked her for her hard work. "You were incredible this week," he said sincerely. She smiled. "So were you." They walked out of the airport together, but when they reached the parking lot, they went their separate ways. No promises. No plans, just an understanding that something had changed them both forever. As Emily drove home through the evening light, she felt both full and empty at once. Full of emotions she couldn't express. And empty because she knew they could never be acted upon. But she also felt grateful for the reminder that connection doesn't always have to lead somewhere. Sometimes it's enough to feel it, to know it was real, and to walk away stronger. That night, as rain once again began to fall in Chicago, Emily sat quietly by her window. She closed her eyes, remembering Seattle not as a place of temptation, but as a moment of truth. Because in that quiet city, under that soft rain, two people had looked at what could have been and chosen what was right. Back in Chicago, life returned to its usual rhythm. The familiar noise of the city, the office chatter, the steady flow of emails, it all seemed the same. But for Emily Carter, nothing felt the same anymore. The trip to Seattle had changed something inside her, quietly but deeply. She sat at her desk, typing, answering calls, going through the motions. Yet her mind wandered back to moments she couldn't forget: the soft rain, the long walks, the look in Daniel Harris's eyes when he said goodbye. It had been 2 weeks since their return. The project they had worked on was a success, and everyone in the company praised their teamwork. To everyone else, Daniel and Emily were simply a great professional pair. But beneath that image, there was a silence between them, gentle, careful, and full of unspoken things. Daniel had returned to his calm, composed self. He was polite, professional, and focused in meetings, never crossing boundaries. Yet his tone with her had changed. Still kind, still respectful, but distant. It was as if he had built a wall between them, not out of coldness, but out of necessity. And Emily understood why. She did the same. She smiled when he walked by, discussed work clearly, and kept her voice steady. But every time their eyes met, she felt that same quiet ache in memory of what almost happened. At home, things felt different too. Her husband, Mark, noticed her silence. "You've been somewhere else lately," he said one evening as they sat across from each other at the dinner table. Emily forced a smile. "Just work stress," she said quickly. But she could tell he didn't believe her. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and went back to his meal. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her marriage, her choices, and the woman she had become. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet guilt lingered in her heart not because of an action, but because of a feeling. She missed something she never truly had. Days turned into weeks. Emily buried herself in work, trying to regain her focus. Daniel and she barely spoke outside of meetings now. It was easier that way. Still, sometimes in the middle of a presentation, when he made a familiar gesture or smiled at a client, she would feel that same warmth that had once pulled her in. One afternoon, Daniel called her to his office to review a new campaign. She walked in, keeping her professional mask firm. He greeted her with his usual calm smile and gestured toward the chair. "Close the door, please." Her heart skipped a beat, but she did as he asked. For a moment, there was silence. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Seattle was complicated," he said softly. Emily's breath caught. She didn't expect him to bring it up. "Yes," she said quietly. "It was." Daniel leaned back in his chair, sighing. "I thought about it a lot." "About what we said?" "What we didn't say. So have I," she admitted. He nodded slowly. "I care about you, Emily. You're one of the best people I've worked with. But I realized something important after that trip." She waited, her hands tight in her lap. He met her eyes. "We always have a choice to do what's easy or to do what's right." His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. She nodded slowly. "You're right. I've been trying to remember that too." He smiled gently. "We didn't cross any lines, and I'm grateful for that, because it means we can keep our respect for each other and for ourselves." There was a long silence between them. Not awkward, just full of quiet understanding. It wasn't a romantic silence anymore. It was one of closure, of acceptance. Finally, Daniel said, "Let's move forward. We have good work to do." Emily smiled, wiping her eyes quickly. "Yes, let's." From that day on, things changed, but in a peaceful way. They worked together with the same efficiency as before. But the emotional weight between them faded slowly, like fog clearing after dawn. They both knew the truth about what they had shared. But they also knew it was something meant to stay in the past. Outside of work, Emily began to focus on herself again. She started painting, a hobby she had long abandoned. The first time she picked up a brush, she felt something come alive inside her. It wasn't about art, it was about finding herself again. She realized that what had drawn her toward Daniel wasn't romance alone, it was the reminder that she still had dreams, that she still wanted to feel something meaningful in her life. Over time, she started to reconnect with her husband, too. They talked more, went out for walks, laughed at old jokes. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She told herself that love wasn't always about sparks, it was about choosing someone every day. Even when things grew quiet, months passed. The Seattle trip became a distant memory, like a story she once lived in another lifetime. But sometimes, when it rained, she still thought about that night standing with Daniel under the streetlight. The sound of rain falling between them. Soft goodbye that said everything they couldn't say aloud. It wasn't sadness she felt anymore. It was gratitude. Grateful for what the moment had taught her. Grateful for the strength it had given her to choose the right path, even when it hurt. One evening, long after work hours, Emily stayed behind in the office to finish a report. Daniel walked by and paused at her desk. "Still working?" he asked, smiling lightly. "Just wrapping up," she said. He nodded, then looked at her for a brief moment. "You've done great work this year, Emily. You should be proud." She smiled back. "Thank you, Daniel. I mean that." He nodded once more, then turned to leave. As he walked away, she realized something she wasn't longing anymore. The feelings that once consumed her had softened into something calm and quiet. Like the end of a storm. That night, as she stepped outside the office, light rain began to fall again. She stood for a moment, looking up at the sky, letting the cool drops touch her face. And she smiled not because of the past, but because of how far she had come since then. Emily had learned that sometimes love isn't meant to be lived. It's meant to be understood. Some connections exist not to stay, but to teach. And though she and Daniel had gone their separate ways emotionally, the respect between them had turned into something lasting, something real, in the end. Seattle wasn't a story of infidelity. It was a story of self-discovery, restraint, and quiet strength. It was about two people who could have made the wrong choice. But didn't two hearts that found understanding without crossing a line? And sometimes, that's the purest form of love there is, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't take, and doesn't destroy. The kind that reminds you who you truly are. As Emily drove home through the city lights, she realized that life had quietly given her a second chance not to rewrite her story, but to live it better, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace.